I think unexamined motivations drive you until they destroy you. And so one of the questions I'm obsessed with is, what are my motivations? Why am I doing what I do? Because if you're listening to a podcast like this, you're addicted to the numbers, you care about performance, you care about success. But what is driving that?
Hi, I'm Michael Hyatt.
And I'm Megan Hyatt Miller.
And you're listening to The Double Win Show.
Well, today we're really excited to share with you our recent conversation with Carey Nieuwhof.
Carey's a good friend. We've both been on his show, his podcast, but he's a former lawyer turned leadership coach and founder of Connexus Church in Ontario, Canada. He's the host of the popular leadership podcast, the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast, which features insights from leaders across various industries. He's the author of several influential books, including Didn't See It Coming and At Your Best. Carey's a sought-after speaker on topics such as burnout prevention, productivity, and time management, which is something we all need, and has a strong following in both the business and nonprofit sectors. His expertise in managing energy and time has been instrumental in transforming the lives of countless professionals. His strategies are focused on helping people build sustainable work-life rhythms to achieve long-term success and fulfillment.
In other words, he's our people. Here's our conversation with Carey.
Carey, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's wonderful to be with you both. Thank you for having me.
Well, this is so fun because we've been on your show.
Yeah.
And I think I've been on your show without Megan. And I follow you.
Yep.
Love your podcast. I think you're doing such great work. And you were one of the first names that we came up with of people we wanted to interview.
Yeah.
So we'd love to start at the beginning because you have such an interesting background, some of which I've given in the opening. But I want you to talk about how you went from being a lawyer to being a pastor to now being a full-time podcaster, content creator, course creator, all the rest.
Leadership coach.
It's amazing, to look back on my life so far and realize it looks like it has just so many twists and turns to it. And a lot of it was just not even course correction, just kind of putting my mind on something and then being open to possible corrections. So when I was really, really young, I wanted to be an attorney. It was like I was 8 years old. I came home one day. And I mean, this is pre-digital. This is the 1970s. All right. So it's not like I was on YouTube, following somebody. It was like, I heard it was a good job. I can't tell you it was a very deep feeling, but it was just, all right, mom and dad, I want to be a lawyer when I grew up, and never really gave up on that dream. Along the way, had a couple of fun things happen. I just, when I was about 12, I remember having a very clear moment where I was driving the car with my mom, and we always had the radio on, and I realized, the guy on the radio is like an actual human being, right? When you start to put things together, most people probably put that together when they're 5. It took me till I was 12. And then I thought, I wonder what it would take to be one of those people on the radio. So when I was 16, walked into my hometown radio station and asked them to hire me, and they did. And I did radio for 8 years in my little hometown, and then Toronto in a major market. And then thought I might do that. Ended up writing a syndicated newspaper column when I was 19 because I was very interested in politics. It was just syndicated locally, but then made my way into law school after a degree in history and political science. And halfway between first and second year law, had a supernatural experience. I would just call it a calling. Now, I was raised in a Christian home, but we were raised Presbyterians, and Presbyterians do not have supernatural experiences. Okay, we don't.
All things decently and in order.
Everything was in order and everything was explicable. So it was a calling, and I believe that it's not just a subjective thing, a calling. It should be affirmed in the people around you. And I was dating my soon-to-be wife at the time, and she affirmed it. My parents affirmed it. My pastor affirmed it. And I'm like, really? So I finished law and worked for a year in downtown Toronto. I thought I'm gonna do the year of articles and actually complete the bar admission course, which is grueling. So got qualified, became a lawyer, then resigned and went into seminary. And the reason I did the extra beyond law school and getting a JD is I wanted to work for a year because I thought most pastors get criticized for being out of touch, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, you haven't worked a day in your life. You live in some ivory tower. I'm like, I'm going to go earn a paycheck for a year, downtown Toronto law. It'll be as as difficult a journey as it can be. And then went into ministry and thought I was going to teach because I don't really have the wiring for a pastor. But in 1995, while I was in the middle of seminary, found three little churches about an hour north of Toronto and thought, well, I'll work there for a year. Well, 29 years later, I'm still here. It's part of our church. Those three little churches, we see spectacular growth.
Hmm.
We amalgamated them. They were like historic. You think of New England, like small little churches that seat 100 people. It was three of those. And I would do the circuit on Sunday morning. Average attendance, they'd been in decline for decades. But somebody, I think Lyle Schaller once said, small churches are like cats. You can't kill them and they have 9 lives. And there's a lot of truth to that. And they'd not really had glory days. They had been, the average attendance when I got there was 6 at one of the churches, 14 at the second, and
Oh my
23 at the
goodness.
mega church. It
Wow.
was so tiny. They were so small.
Hard to break into small
But
groups.
Yeah, exactly. But they were hanging on for dear life, and we started to grow. And then, sold those buildings, moved into an elementary school, built a new building. Then we exited a denomination in 2007, started over again as a non-denominational church. And now we're home to 3,000 or 4,000 people, have about 1,500.
Good grief.
Whoa.
It's
As
amazing.
founding pastor. Yeah. So it's been and in the middle of nowhere, like literally cows for neighbors. It's amazing to see what God has done. So that's sort of the story of my life. And then 8 years ago, stepped out of the lead pastor role. And I had been doing some blogging on the side. I had literally just launched a podcast the year before. And I kind of felt like I felt some stuff shifting in me as far as my calling. The things that used to excite me frustrated me. And I saw what was ahead, and I had the leaders to hand things over to. And I'm like, I think now is the time to go. Did a succession. My successor's done an amazing job. The church is bigger and better than when I led it. And I've been building into leaders. And the way I think about what I do now is I went to law school and nobody taught me how to run a law firm. And I went to seminary and nobody taught me how to run a church. So I try to help leaders with the stuff that nobody taught us. And I've written some books, thinking how it all links together. Podcasting in a year in courtroom law prepares you, radio in a year in courtroom law prepares you for things like podcasting and public speaking. So it all seems to have a communication theme. And that's what I'm doing these days is communicating with leaders in various forms to try to help them fill in the blanks, the hardest parts of leadership that nobody taught you.
Wow. Okay, I have to ask you because I know our listeners are going to wonder, what do you think the hardest part of leadership is that we have not been taught?
So for me, and I think for a lot of other leaders, it's self-leadership. It's that
I
ability
agree.
to lead ourselves, to stay engaged, to stay healthy, everything from avoiding burnout to not becoming the person everyone resents, to sifting your motivations, to staying engaged at a meaningful level, to avoiding cynicism and pride. I mean, it's all of those soft issues
Yeah.
that we have seen take out so many leaders. I mean, affairs and abuse notwithstanding, if you take that off the table, which are serious issues, but just look at the internal battle of a leader, how lonely it is, how you often feel you don't have anyone to turn to, the personal demons you're fighting. That is the hardest part of leadership for me, and I think for a lot of leaders.
I would agree with that. I work with some church leaders too. And usually it's around those soft leadership skills that they didn't get in seminary and yet have to utilize every day. And I think the self-leadership, self-awareness part of it is huge.
Well, and you know what is funny? You also work with more business leaders than church leaders
Right.
as a coach, and certainly our clients and so forth in our masterminds. And I don't think anybody learns that. I don't care if you have an MBA.
True.
I don't care if, you've been in corporate America. Like those are just not things that people are taught, but they're the things they're dying to talk about. They're the things they're overwhelmed by, that they can't talk. They feel like they can't talk to their friends about. It's like, it must just be me. Like I'm the only one that doesn't know how to do these things. And in reality, of course, it's not just only you, it's only everybody. But I think what an amazing calling that you have to speak into those issues, because it's just
And
it's a
I agree,
vacuum.
it's a business leader thing. In that single year in law, I worked with a lot of lawyers who were really at the top of their game. I mean, it was sort of the Wall Street of Canada,
Hmm.
right, where I was. And I saw the top, and I realized very early on as a young leader in my mid-20s, oh, it's empty up here.
Mhm.
Like, these are people who are struggling in their marriage. I remember we were going through a modest recession at that point, and the lawyers at the time, so this is like almost 30 years ago, were making $500,000 a year, which, multiply it today, you're pushing seven figures.
Mhm.
So I don't know what your scale is, but for most of us, that's decent money,
Yeah.
right? And as a student making 35,000 a year, that seemed like unrealistic. And I remember the partners walking around the firm talking about how they were going to endure a 10% pay cut
Mm.
and what a hardship that would be. And I'm kind of like, I think I could figure that one out at 25. Now you have lifestyle creep and everything, but then divorces and affairs and
Yeah.
misery and unhappiness. There was one lawyer in particular. He would come in on a Friday afternoon, and I remember one Friday, and I'm like low person on the totem pole in this law firm, and he waves a lottery ticket in my face. And he goes, "If I win this, you will never see my face again."
Wow.
Now I'm
Mm.
kind of like, that's interesting. And what made it more interesting is he owned the firm. It's like, could you're like,
Wow.
this is what I'm seeing as a guy in my mid 20s. And I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, like there's this path to success, this ladder that we climb. When you get to the top, not only is it leaning against the long wall, but you're like, this is miserable. This is
Yeah.
horrible. Why,
Mhm.
why am I here? And I thought there has to
Mhm.
be more to life. So my heart, and you know what, just because you're in ministry doesn't mean you're exempt from it.
No.
After you do your
No.
fifth
Yeah.
campus, you're kind of like, and now what? Or you hit your downloads in your podcast, it's like 10 million, 20 million, 100 million downloads, and you're like, and
Yeah.
Yeah.
what else?
Yep.
These are real. I think unexamined motivations drive you until they destroy you.
Yeah.
And so
Ooh.
one of the questions I'm obsessed with is, what are my motivations? Why am I doing what I do? Because if you're listening to a podcast like this, you're addicted to the numbers, you care about performance, you care about success. But what is driving that? And
Mhm.
I've
Yeah.
seen that unarticulated, unrealized drive destroy a lot of leaders. And I'm very interested in preventing that in my own life. And as you guys are, seeing that prevented in a lot of people's lives.
In Didn't See It Coming, you talk about cynicism. That's a challenge that many leaders face. And I have definitely noticed that, and particularly for people in ministry, but also just for people, professionals in general. I don't care if you're doctors, dentists, lawyers, financial advisors, it affects everybody. But what are some of the early signs of cynicism, and how do you combat it? Because I feel like a lot of people that are deep into cynicism are not self-aware about it.
The thing that I've been able to trace out is that cynicism is related to knowledge. If you really think
Hmm.
about it, unless you come from a really traumatic background, most of us had reasonably happy childhood, good memories. I was a pretty happy-go-lucky kid. And I look back on that and it's like, well, why is it that we're so happy when we're young or just starting out or in the early phase of our career? And the answer is because we're kind of stupid. We didn't know anything, right? It's like
Ignorance is
all
bliss.
optimism and everything's wonderful and mom and dad are going to work it out and I'm going to make partner or I'm going to own the firm one day or I'm going to, so we're in the idealistic phase of our life, and that lasts until, again, unless you have a really exceptionally difficult story, it lasts until your 20s, sometimes your 30s, and then you accumulate knowledge.
Mm.
And as you accumulate knowledge, there's an ancient text that says, with much wisdom comes much sorrow, with much knowledge comes much sadness.
Mm.
And I think it's true, because if you think about hiring for a minute, if you're going to hire someone, your first hires are like, we're building the dream team. Like we're going to crush it. This is going to be the best team ever. And then you realize that of the 8 people you hired, 2 of them are not working out and you got to let them go. And one's sort of so-so, but probably not that great. And then you give it 5 years and someone betrays you and you're like,
Mhm.
oh, And then you're like, okay, well, I got it wrong the first time. I'm going to go back. I'm going to hire better people. Round two, you hire better people, and then it doesn't quite work out the way you thought. And at round three, you find yourself sitting in a job interview. I'm interviewing you, Michael, and I'm going, I wonder how long until Michael leaves. Right. And you're
Mm.
thinking that in the job interview. Now, what's changed? Well, you got a couple of laps, you got a couple of reps, and you realize this doesn't always work out the way I thought it would. And that's true with clients, that's true with team,
Mm-hmm.
that's true with customers, that's true with congregations, it's true with everybody you meet. And so you run into that situation again and again. And cynicism, age and cynicism are frequent companions. And one thing that's made this much more complicated is access to 24/7 news,
Yeah.
way
Ugh.
beyond cable, but every time you touch your phone. I mean, and I was talking with Sharon McMahon. Sharon says so on Instagram a few times over the last few years. And bad news is a big business. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's the model that broadcast media uses, but also hate actually gets rewarded on the internet. So the more outrageous I can be, the more difficult I can be. So you combine all of that, the steady diet of anger and cynicism, plus your own personal experiences. You've got kids. They turn out to be great, but it's got its frustrations. And Megan, you're in the teenage years right now, or
Yeah.
just coming out in some. And I found those really challenging years because you're doing your best and sometimes you're met with grunts. And,
Yes. So true.
eventually they get out
Yeah.
of it. My kids are 32
Yeah.
and 28 now, and I have the privilege of working with my 28-year-old, and it's a lot better. But I got to tell you, like, it's tough out there.
Hmm.
And the second part of your question, so how do you guard against that? Um, I think you got to make a decision. I'm going to trust again. I'm going to hope again. I'm going to believe again. I think it's a decision. But then the hack that's really, really helped me, and I want to do more research into this. I'd like to write a book on this at some point because I think it's a battle. And for me, I'm not coming at you as somebody with all the answers. It is a daily battle. I read the
Mm.
news too. I get burned and disappointed as well. And I get frustrated and I'm like, oh, there it is again. I'm growing cynical.
Mm.
Um, is curiosity. So
Mm.
one of my favorite things to do is my podcast. And when I'm doing a podcast interview, I want to be the student. I don't want to come in as the teacher. I want to come in
Mhm.
as the student. So win for me is if the guest talks 95% of the time, 98% of the time, and I just ask more questions.
Mhm.
Love that.
And the more curious I am about something, even if I don't like something, like I don't like what someone's saying online, well, why would they say that?
Mm.
What would be true in their life if I can start asking questions and I can be a curious person? Because one of the correlations I noticed as I was doing an initial study of this is cynical people are never curious and curious people
Mm.
are never cynical.
Mm.
They seem to be mutually exclusive.
That's
So
so
if I
fascinating.
can stay curious, then maybe I can avoid cynicism. And
Yeah.
if I find myself landing on the cynical side, then I got to get back to curiosity and ask more questions.
That's such a great hack, particularly when you're dealing with people that have, for example, a political viewpoint that's different than yours. Because
Mhm.
that conversation usually starts from cynicism and it's people
Yep.
talking over the top of each other and nobody's really listening. But if you can get curious and, assume positive intent on the part of
Yep.
the other person, like they're not really out to destroy the country or really out to, have this negative impact. And, I think most of the time that's true. They're doing what they think is right, but to just be curious because you might learn something
Mhm.
and you might learn we're not as far apart as we thought.
Yeah.
I completely agree with that, and I have strong views on those issues as well as most of the people listening to this show would. But the reality is, when I really, if I can get through the humanity on the other person, right?
Mm.
If I can look past their positions and actually see who they are and hear their story. Maybe if I had their story, I would have exactly the same views. Maybe if I grew up and I had those experiences and I'd been
Hmm.
been burned, it's empathy. And
Mhm.
we're losing the ability to empathize with each other. We have weaponized differences, and that is very concerning. And so, I think for those of us in leadership, we have to be the ones who model a way for other people. And if you think about the people that you're leading, if they see you being curious, if they see you empathizing, if they see you paying attention to what's underneath the positions and to look for mutual or common interests, as William Ury would frame the situation, you're looking for interests, not positions, to say, well, we both believe in this country. Isn't that true? Yeah, you're not out to destroy this country. You both probably want some more money in your bank, not less money in your bank. Yeah, that's probably true. You probably want some freedom and security. Yeah, we probably want freedom and security. All right, so we're not that different, are we?
Mm-hmm.
Your method to getting there might be different than mine, but if you can focus on those common interests, and I do think our politics is broken, and I think a generation ago politicians did a better job of focusing on those mutual interests, and the differences were the path that were going to get us there. And now it's all weaponized, et cetera, et cetera. So the system is broken, but I think criticizing the system is going to break it even more. I think we need people who will show us a different way, who will ask the question behind the question and look for the common points that we can agree on.
It's so interesting as you're talking about cynicism, because I keep thinking about the idea of vulnerability, that cynicism is in many ways a self-protective strategy. It's a way of defending yourself against the things like disappointment and disillusionment and pain and suffering and it's a way to protect yourself. It's kind of like an armor that we put on. And I think as adults, the older we get, the more of, as you said, the more life we kind of have under our belt and the things we've experienced, the more we have to be intentional about not kind of unconsciously armoring up all the time, because if we're armored up, we also can't experience the great parts of life, the joy, the love, the fulfillment, the calling. Like those all come from our heart. And if our heart is so defended and self-protected, then we don't have access there.
That's such a good insight, Megan. I think I've seen that so often. I've seen it myself. I've seen it in others, that cynicism is a defense, that underneath every cynic is a broken heart.
Right.
And somewhere along the way, like think about it relationally, right? How does someone get to the point where they say all men are or all women are, right?
Yep.
Like, and you've heard that. You've heard people say that. I'm not touching a relationship. All women are fill in the blanks. All men are fill in the blanks. When you really drill down on that story, that is a protective defense mechanism, because their heart got broken not once, not twice, but probably 3, 4, 5 times. And, cynics, I had a friend who passed away recently, too young, Tony Morgan. You probably know him, fantastic person. And Tony and I were talking years ago, and he said, I don't want to be a member of the old man's club that gets together every Tuesday and talks about what's wrong with the world. And I thought, that's true, because eventually you feel passed over, you feel left behind.
Yep.
And what's your job? You're criticizing now. You're criticizing everybody and everything. And I think underneath that is a broken heart. And so what I have to do is, when I find myself with my heart broken, which it does get broken personally in leadership, when my ideas get shot down, is to look at that and go, all right, I'm hurting. And that's not easy for me to do as a guy, as an Enneagram 8, as a former lawyer. That is not my natural language. And then when I get to that, I kind of grieve that loss and say, yeah, but I'm going to stay curious. I'm going to hope again. I'm going to trust again. I'm going to believe again. I'm going to be one of those people. My cynicism tends to subside for a season.
You talk a lot about burnout, and I'm just curious, what's the relationship between burnout and cynicism?
It's some kind of loop. I don't know 100% what the relationship is, but they're frequent companions, just like age and cynicism are. And if you're burnout happens a couple ways. I think about burnout that we would all recognize as burnout, from not being able to get out of bed to just being so cynical and so jaded and so tired and non-productive. You're not producing. You took time off and it's not refueling you, et cetera, et cetera. So that's like classic burnout, where everybody would tap you on the shoulder and go, Carey, you're burned out. And you go see your doctor and he's like, yeah, it looks like burnout. There's another kind of burnout that I've been thinking about a lot over the last few years, and I call it mid-grade burnout.
Hmm.
And that's when the functions of life continue, but the joy of life is gone. So you got out of
Yeah.
bed and you went to work and you're producing, maybe not at an A plus level, but let's say a B plus or an A minus because you're good at what you do. And you're at the kids' games, but your heart isn't there and your mind is somewhere else. And you've got date night with your spouse if you're connected with someone. And you're sort of there, but not really. And you're going through the motions. And as I talk to leaders around the world about burnout, a lot of people can identify with I'm flat on my back and exhausted and I need some help or some medication or I need rehab or something to get me out of this funk. But the lights go on when I talk about mid-grade burnout. And I don't believe that was the way we were created to live.
Mhm.
And some signs of like a low grade burnout are that you're now cynical. You look at your 22-year-old self and your 32 or 42-year-old self, and you're like, I don't recognize me anymore. Like
Mm.
I'm cynical, I'm jaded, I'm hurt, I'm tough, I've got a thick skin. I don't believe anything anymore from people. Uh, to be honest, I'm phoning it in with my family. Like, yeah,
Mm.
I'm not getting a divorce, but I'm not really engaged relationally. My friendships are kind of on autopilot. I don't feel anything anymore. I think one of the signs of burnout at a full level or a mid grade level is that um, yeah, you don't, you have good muscle memory. So somebody tells you, I just got diagnosed with cancer. I'm actually having breakfast with somebody tomorrow who just got diagnosed with cancer. And when he called me last week, I cried with him on the phone. And I'm like, and these are two guys who don't cry together,
Mm.
two guys in their 50s who don't cry together. I thought that's a good sign. Like I felt that. I
Mm.
felt
Mm.
that. And there have been seasons of my life where I was probably dipping into mid-grade burnout or I was in full out burnout where I would have known exactly what to say and exactly how to intone my voice to appear empathetic.
Mm.
But on the inside, even though I cared theoretically, I couldn't feel the emotion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's true for the sad parts of life. But, your kid wins a soccer game. You're supposed to be really happy, scored the winning goal, and you're like, yeah, way to go. But you don't feel it. And that numbness, that idea, that position of feeling numb most days is a big warning sign.
Mm.
And those are some signs of burnout that
I
people should
think
pay attention
this is
to.
so helpful because when we're talking about the double win, you're not getting the double win if you're burnout. Like those are mutually exclusive places. And I think having the ability to have some diagnostic criteria for that our listeners and even us, that we're able to go, oh yeah, that's what's going on. Maybe it's not as acute as the full blown version, but the last several years in North America have been pretty intense. All over the world actually with COVID. But I think there's a lot of stressors and a lot of contributors to that. I'm curious to know, Carey, what do you think drives that mid-grade burnout? Like what's upstream from the numbness, from the apathy? What's upstream that's causing that?
I have a quote that hangs on the wall just outside my office. It's from Socrates, and it's the unexamined life is not worth living. And I think that is upstream
Mm.
from it. Life happens to us, and you guys are both so great at helping people see the issues under the issues. So you're helping leaders examine their life, and that's what I want to do with my life as well. But when you don't, you get caught up in the torrent. And I think one of the reasons it's gotten worse, like burnout was a term that was actually created in the 1970s
Mm.
as a label that they could put on what was happening to doctors. When doctors go through their residency, it's brutal. You're working 18, 20-hour days. You get no sleep. You're sleeping in a broom closet, and then you're back on shift again. And these doctors were not functioning at normal levels, like at very suboptimal levels after their residency or internship. And they diagnosed the term burnout. And then it became a professional term: lawyers burn out, accountants burn out, engineers burn out. Then it became a life term where retired people are burning out. All of us are burning out, and toddlers are burning out, and everybody's burned out, right? So it's creeped a little bit over the last 50 years appropriately. So what's changed in that? Upstream, the amount of relationships that we have to manage on a daily
Mhm.
basis. Robin Dunbar, the British psychologist, wrote a great book called How Many Friends Can One Person Have? And he makes a very compelling argument that for millennia, we lived in small communities of 200 people. So if you think about your place in Franklin, imagine it was 200 people. You go to the butcher, you go to the baker, the blacksmith, the cobbler because you need new shoes. And that's a reasonable span of care. If you look at how armies were designed, right back to the way the Romans did their armies, it was never a group of more than 200 people because 200 people became unmanageable.
Hmm.
So you look at it, we move to cities, we become very dense in our populations, and then our phones arrive, and suddenly we have 500 followers, 50,000 followers, 5,000 friends, and our brains break.
Hmm.
We're not designed for that. I'm old enough in the 90s to remember when I had one inbox. And sometimes on my first iteration of email, you'd get 5 emails in a day, and that was a big day. I counted it up a
The
few
glory
years
days.
ago. Yeah, exactly. I now have 17 inboxes between all of
Wow.
the social media apps and different email addresses. I have 17 inboxes. How do you keep up with that? And the answer
Yeah.
is you don't. You weren't designed to. So upstream is we're not taking time to examine what's going on around us. Upstream is we're literally overwhelmed. We already talked about the news cycle and social media. We're inundated with too many relationships, and we're overwhelmed, overworked, and overcommitted. And
Mhm.
so I think that leads to a general breakdown in human functioning, at least human thriving.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do is take that apart bit by bit and try to figure it out. And I've got some practical things that have really helped over the years and I've been able to help leaders with, but I think that is a small list of what is upstream. There's more.
Yeah, I'd love to know what some of those things
I,
are.
I would too, especially around saying no, because one of the challenges I have as a recovering people pleaser is
Uh-huh.
that my default is to say yes. If somebody needs help, I want to be there to help them. And yet,
Mm.
I've had to get almost calloused, in a sense, because I realize that saying yes to something, I'm saying no to something else implicitly. And I have like 21 immediate family members in Franklin where we live.
This is what happens when you
Right.
have 5 kids and they have 5 kids.
Yeah. And so,
It's
so
like exponential math.
Should have done the math a long time ago, Michael.
Yeah, that's right. It's too late.
and then I have friends maybe that don't have any kids or their kids don't live here, and they can understand why we can't get together more. And it's just like literally, and I'm in kind of that sandwich generation where both my parents
Mhm.
are 90 years old, they're still alive, but they're requiring a lot. So that's, it's tough. But I think if there are times when I feel really guilty about saying no, and I have to kind of psych myself up. But what are some of your practical tips for that kind of thing?
Yeah, we, for thousands of years, operated in these small communities that were inherently relational. And we are not made for the world as it is right now.
Mhm.
And you can see that Jonathan Haidt's work on the anxious generation, what's
Yep.
happening to Gen Z and Gen Alpha is like very ground shaking. So, what do you do about it? Well, back to Dunbar, he talks about prioritizing your relationships. And I find this very helpful. And he says basically, we all have the capacity for 3 to 5 deep friendships. Now, most people, because they're so overwhelmed by the hundreds, thousands of people, or even people running a company, it's like, I deal with people all day. Okay. I don't want to deal with people in my off life. I have 500 employees. I don't want to deal with people when I'm at home. And as a result, there's nobody in that 3 to 5 close relationships.
Mm.
Like friendship
Mhm.
is dying, people are lonely. And that is a problem because you were designed for close, intimate relationship that has a spiritual component, physical component, an emotional, a relational component. It is essential to thriving as a human being. A lot of people, and when I talk to Henry Cloud about this, Henry Cloud is, and your dog doesn't count and your wife doesn't count. Okay. So, because it's like, well, I have my dog and I have my wife. It's like, no, okay, your wife's a different. But who are those 3 to 5? Who are those 3 to 5? And I have been working on that very intensely over the last 5 years because after 25 years of ministry with thousands of people, I realized I was in danger of not having 3 to 5 really close personal relationships. These are people with, I've heard it phrased, refrigerator rights, people who can just show up to your house unannounced, walk in, put your head down on your counter and open the refrigerator and start taking stuff like a teenager. Do you have anyone in that
I
category?
love that.
That's great. You need 3 to 5. That's it. If you have 3, you're relationally rich. If you
Mm.
have 5, fantastic, but you can't have more than that.
Mm-hmm.
Then he says there's like 7 to 15 that you know pretty well. You'll see them at summer barbecues. You'll see them at Christmas. You'll see them maybe once a month. You're texting or connecting with them. That's great. Then there's, maybe the 150 people that you would send. If you send Christmas cards, you send Christmas cards to, you catch up with them in a Facebook group, you see them at some family reunion or work function. They're friends and colleagues. Another very helpful framing, the difference between real friends and deal friends.
Yeah. I love that
And
distinction.
I got a buddy, Rob. He's a pediatrician. He's great. I was helping him pull his boat out last weekend. We were at their place. We went for dinner. He sent me a book proposal he's working on. So there's one way I might be marginally useful in his life, but we're basically essentially useless to each other because I can't use him to grow my podcast or to architect my next course that I'm going to do. And I'm certainly not helping him in his medical practice. I promise you that. I've got nothing to contribute there, but we're great friends. And you need 3 to 5 of those. So to your point, Michael, those 3 to 5 should have instant access to you. Those are the people you get back to right away. Those are the people that's unlimited. And you can figure out what to do with your family. But then, there are other people that you've got to start prioritizing. And I'm thinking a lot these days in terms of saying no. So that's a big framing because I really think the unexamined life is not worth living. So I try to think these things through to first principles. And then let's get to the practical application. Categorical decisions are your best friends. So when I came out on the other side of burnout, I realized, there are really 3 zones in any day. There's a green zone, a red zone, and a yellow zone. Green zone, you got 3 to 5 of those hours where you're at your best, you're feeling amazing, you're excited if you're working on a new article you're writing, the words are flowing, you're in flow. It's great. For morning people, I know you guys are morning people, that happens in the morning, right? You love it. It's great. But then there's a red zone. For me, it's 4 to 6 in the afternoon where I basically turn into a zombie. I have 3 brain cells left. I'm functionally useless and I need a nap or caffeine or all of the above. Most of us have that if you're a morning person after lunch or before dinner or sometime in the afternoon. And night owls would have their green zone in the evening or later in the day. And maybe their red zone is first thing in the morning when they wake up for 2 hours. They can't function. That's fine. And then yellow is everything in between. Yellow is very productive. It's just not your best. So what I realized in terms of categorical decisions, when I broke my day down into that, it's like, so what am I? At the time, I was a preacher. It's like, if that sermon isn't done, we're all in big trouble and it better be good. So I had to write that in my green zone because what would happen is I would book breakfast meetings in my green zone and you'd meet at the restaurant at 7 a.m. and it goes till 8:30, not 8 like you said it would. And then you stop by a drive-through and grab a coffee. You walk into the office. People are chatting with you. It's 9 o'clock before you sit down and look at your screen. And then you have 5 texts and 17 emails. And you're like, okay. And next thing you know, it's lunch. Well, I just burned through the best hours of my day.
Yep.
So one of the categorical decisions I made is no more breakfast meetings. Now, there are rare exceptions. I'm meeting with a guy who's diagnosed with one decision. So if you're like, can you meet for breakfast? Unless I'm in a very atypical week, the answer is no, I can't, but I can do coffee at 2:00 or I can do coffee at 4:00 or, what do you want to do? You want to go for a walk later in the day? I'll do that. So that's an example of a categorical decision. Another
love
one
that.
would be the type of event you're doing. We're all speakers here, right? So basically, I do leadership events. I'm a preacher, but I don't preach on weekends because there are leaders in the crowd, but I'm basically preaching to people. I would rather speak to 100 leaders than 1,000 people. So right off the bat, my team and I know if I get a speaking request to speak to people, not leaders, it's probably going to be a no. And then there are particular, I'll drill down even more. So you pre-establish criteria that say this is probably a yes or probably a no. Another decision I made as a pastor, because as your church grows, your weekends and evenings disappear because people are getting married and people die and you have to do weddings and funerals. So I just decided, and it's very counterintuitive. A lot of these decisions are going to be counterintuitive because nobody else is doing them. I don't do weddings anymore. I just don't do weddings. And that was a hard message for a lot of people. Now,
bet.
do I make exceptions? Yeah. If you've been my assistant for 10 years and you're getting married, I'll probably do your wedding. If you're related to me, I'll do your wedding. That's what I'll do. If you're part of the inner circle here at the church, like an elder or a key staff member, I'll do your funeral. Beyond that, the answer is probably no. And we have lots of people who can serve you and lots of people who can do weddings. And that rule has held up for over a decade.
Wow.
I do about one wedding a year and one funeral a year. That's it.
Do you explain that to your congregation so that they understand what the rules of engagement are and so that they don't get upset when they see you doing a wedding, so that they understand the rubric that's kind of behind that?
Exactly. I think you have to. And we explain to our elders and to our team, hey, moving forward, I'm not going to be doing weddings. And here's why. And then when people would inquire, if you have the privilege, a lot of people listening to this would, of having an assistant, if you have a good one, and I've been blessed with some great ones, they probably have the gift of empathy. And Carey would love to do your weddings. However, his policy is that he only does it for staff or for close family. So I'm really sorry about that. And he's sorry about that. But here are 5 people who we recommend for weddings who can perform your wedding. Or here are 5 people who can do the funeral. They would be excellent at it. And they're better at it than Carey is. So you're going to love them. And most people, there's a few people that are going to be upset that I didn't do it. But in most cases, I'm the only pastor they know. And so it's like, you'll do. And if we give them 5 other options, 98% of the time, they're pretty good with that. And if not, I can have a personal conversation and say, look, I would love to do your wedding. It's just, I think you can understand that then all my weekends are gone and my time with my family is gone. And I really want to prioritize that in this season.
Okay, so I want to play a little game. Are you ready?
Okay. I have something I want to do too, but you go first.
I have a feeling it might be the same game. This is okay. If you're not watching us, if you're listening to us right now, what you don't know is that my dad and I are matching by accident yet again. This happens all the time. We both have on.
And Carey kind of looks.
And Carey kind of has.
I'm very
almost
similar. It was a Thursday vibe thing. I don't know what it was.
We have olive green sweaters on and cream colored like tops underneath. Anyway, so oftentimes we have the same thought apparently about our clothes and many other things. But here's the game I want to play. What is the hardest thing for you to say no to right now that really makes a negative impact on your personal margin? Not just something that like is a one-off, but like the thing that is sabotaging your margin. Cause I know you're struggling with this right now. And I would like to get Carey's input and coaching for you on that. Cause I think even though you're a coach, even though you teach this stuff, it is so hard to do this for yourself. And sometimes the outside input can be really helpful. So this is an intervention.
Oh, wow. Here we go.
Let's go.
The end of the Double Win podcast. You're seeing it live.
That's right
now.
It's a new feature. It's called the intervention.
That's a great question, Megan. That's such a great question. Oh, man.
Let me see. I think there's probably a couple different categories. One is it's really hard to say no to my team when they ask me to do certain things, particularly around promotion, because I feel like, just to be honest, it's related to revenue. And so that if I don't do it, we're going to get a lesser result than we would like.
Is there something in particular that you're thinking of?
Well, first of all, I hate social media. So thankfully, I'm not doing that anymore. And I think everybody's just given up on me. So that's good.
We both completely stink at social media. Like, just fire us.
I can get really great at it for 30 days and then I flame out.
Yeah.
I would say that. I would say, and I enjoy doing the other things like the webinars. I really like.
Yeah.
But they are time consuming.
Sure.
I would think the biggest thing is people, and this happened to me twice yesterday, just people they're more than acquaintances, Carey, but they're not my best friends. But like I got a text message from a guy yesterday and he said, hey, I got a time sensitive matter that I really need your counsel on?
Like somebody from church, somebody
Yeah.
from your neighborhood, somebody that you can't just blow off and they're going to go away forever. You're going to see them on Sunday. You're going to see them on your walk.
Okay. Let's start with filming the ads you don't want to film. I can totally empathize with that because I look at my Asana, we use Asana, and there are things in there that I'm like, yeah, I don't really want to do that. And I literally had this conversation with my team last week. And I said, I'm not going to put my situation on yours, but just to give you an analogous situation, I was doing a lot of, hey, redo this article and shoot this video on XYZ. And my problem is if my heart isn't in it, everybody can tell.
Mm-hmm.
And having started this company from scratch, it was whatever idea I thought. I'm very bought into my ideas. I don't know about you. I'm very bought into my ideas. I am not quite as bought into sometimes other people's ideas. But as you say, if you don't raise revenue, it's like last one out, turn off the lights. Like it's not going to happen. So we had a really good conversation and we did a trade-off. It's like, you can say whatever you want. You don't have to follow the script. Just do the CTA here. And I'm like, okay, that made that more interesting to me. Because there is like, if you're doing too much, sure, you can be like, well, what happens if we cut this from 5 of these a month to 2 of these a month? Because I think I've got the appetite for 2, but not 5. And what if I can make the script that it sounded more like me? And then we had a really interesting conversation because I realized I am writing less now. Like the good news is the company and our operations is beautiful and automated. The bad news is I've written less than I normally would write since like 40 years ago. I was writing papers in university. I was writing papers in high school, and now I'm hardly writing anymore. And I'm at my best when I'm writing. So I negotiated with my team and I said, I'll do your work, but let me write stuff. And they're like, well, where are we going to publish it? I'm like, I don't care. Just put it out on the internet and don't index it. I need to write because if I write, I know what I think. So we negotiated that so that, because you're right, Michael, if your job becomes not fun for you, you're not going to want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Then you're the guy with the lottery ticket that owns the law firm, that you were talking about earlier.
And I think that's the key for a lot of us who are leaders is we get out of the fun stage, as Les McEwen would call it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're into predictable success, but we don't like the structure and the systems. And so I think it's a constant negotiation. As to your friend who texted you yesterday, let's drill down on that a little bit more. Did you follow up? Did you have the conversation?
I did. I said, well, as a matter of fact, I'm available now. Why don't you just call me? And
Excellent.
And then 45 minutes later.
Right. Was it an emergency?
No.
Okay. This is what I learned after 25 years of ministry. 90% of emergencies are non-emergencies. That somebody texts me and says, when I was a pastor, my marriage is falling apart. I need to see you today. It's like, wait, you had a perfectly good marriage at 6 a.m. and suddenly it just fell apart. And now it's 1 o'clock and you need to see me today. I finally saw through the smoke screen because what that meant, and I mean, you guys know this, you teach this stuff, right? What happens then? When your kids were young, in particular, when the girls were young, Michael, you're like, all right, sorry, girls, can't be at your game tonight. Sorry, can't be home for supper, Gail. I got to go. I got to fix this couple's marriage. Meanwhile, your own is like, not doing well. So I discovered that 95% of it wasn't an emergency. Then I would say to someone like that, hey, I'm really sorry you're going through something right now. Your answer to deal with it right now is a great one, and I'll come back to that. The other thing you can say is, I can talk about it tomorrow at 3 o'clock or Friday at 10 a.m. Which one works best for you? So all of a sudden you schedule it for a time that is convenient to you, because messages are always sent at the convenience of the sender, right? If I email you, it was a convenient time for me to email you. I have no idea whether it was a convenient time for you to receive that email. The second thing you could do is you could do that. Second thing is you can pick up the phone and say, I got time to talk right now. And then when he picks up, you can say, perfect timing, man. I got 10 minutes. What's on your mind? Just throw in a time marker. And that can really help because they're going to give you less of the backstory and more of the presenting issue.
Yep.
The other thing, which is fine, is you just say, I am so slammed this week. I'm sorry. I don't have time for it. If it's church related, I'll see you Sunday. You want to catch 5 minutes in the lobby?
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
I have started to deal with church stuff like that because I'm there already. And I just hate seeing a cluttered calendar. And I think the reason I took that call last night is that if I were to schedule it, it'd be one more thing on my calendar that I would dread, where it's just like, I'm going to eat the frog now and be done with it.
Okay, so what if you want to, though, not do those? Like if I'm just going to say the thing you're not going to say. What if you're like, actually, I would like never to do those kinds of things. Like I want to be available, kind of like your wedding idea, the categorical decisions. I want to be available to my family and my closest friends for the 911 calls, but I don't want to get together with somebody to pick my brain. I don't want to get together with somebody who has a marriage that's struggling. Like that's just not where I feel called. Like there are other avenues for that. How do you categorically say no to that?
You can do that. So there's two approaches you can take. One means you lose a lot of friends overnight and you
You're
just
like,
draw
yes,
a line and
great.
people pleaser, and Mike is going to be like, oh, but you're just like, yeah, I'm not able to take that call. I'm so sorry. The other thing you can do is you can redirect people and say, you know what, I'm taking fewer of those calls these days. Maybe you can try Pastor X or person Y. Then that's another way of potentially losing friends. Try Megan. I'm not
Megan
the best
never
person
answers
to
her phone.
it.
It's so weird. Yeah.
Yeah. The third is to gradually decelerate. Where I've found when it comes to, let's say it came in by email, this happened to be a phone call. Often the people who are most desperate will send you a long email, often without any spaces and some of it in all caps. The best answer, if it requires a response, they don't all require a response, but if it's someone you know, is to answer a long email with a short response. To answer a long preamble with a short response. And what happens over time, it's a bit of a dance, is they realize, oh, Michael's not going to give me the 7-page trope I was hoping for. He's going to give me quick advice. Maybe he's not the best person to advise me, or maybe I should look elsewhere, or maybe this wasn't such a big situation. So the people who are more relationally intelligent will pick up on that. And the good ones will dance with you. It's like, you know what, that was too much for you. I'm sorry. They'll get it after a while. The others will just give up because it's like, I didn't get what I wanted. The other thing, Michael, you mentioned this a couple of times, and I'm with you. I hate a cluttered calendar. And I'm like, it's okay, man. Like I have one other thing on my calendar today at 5:00. This is my glory week. And what I discovered is all of us have a particular meeting tolerance. So I'm going to give you mine. This is descriptive, not prescriptive. If I have fewer than 10 meetings, and a meeting includes a haircut, which I got yesterday, I had to redefine
That's
this
great.
numerous times. Thank you. But whether it's like I got to get my tires changed, or I got to get a haircut, or I have to see the dentist, that counts as a meeting. You're like, wait, that's not work related. No, but it impacts my mood. It's like I got too much to do. And my biggest value is when I'm spending about 60 to 70% of my week working on new content, solving problems, thinking time. That's when I'm at my best. So basically, I've trained my team to know if I have more than 15 appointments in a week, my calendar is full. So when you look at my calendar, those can be 15-minute meetings, they can be hour-long meetings. But if there's more than 15, that week is booked. It's done. So they go in, they count it up, and go, I'm sorry, Carey hasn't got any time available next week, but we can book you in December, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know what your number would be, but this is where self-awareness becomes such a great thing. Just look at you can look back over your calendar over the last 2 months and go, oh, that was such a stressful week. I was flying here and then I was there and then I had these meetings and I had to take that call from the airport and then I did the webinar from a hotel room and then that was a bad week. But then there are other weeks that you're like, that was an amazing week. And then you'll start to see the number.
This is gold.
And
this is so good.
Experiment.
Yeah.
And then for me, if it's less than 10, I'm bored and I start to self-destruct. And I need a little bit of pressure. Like I better get this done because I have a meeting at 1:00. I need a little bit of pressure. So your number could be different, but that has been so helpful.
I feel like on my writing days, so I write on Wednesdays. I have a weekly newsletter that I write. I adjust my morning ritual. I always go for a walk though, because that is like my thinking time. And I find that I have really good ideas on my walk. And I'm usually like writing things down or dictating things into my notes app. So that's helpful for me. I think in a perfect world, I would start working at like 7 a.m. and I'd be done even earlier than I am. I'd just move my whole day up and then I'd be done at like, 1 o'clock or something and then have a couple hours before the kids came home. The problem is 7 o'clock in our house is everybody's getting out the door to school. We're checking folders. We're finding football equipment. We're making lunches. And so I don't feel like in this season of my life, unless I literally exited the building, that would be very, very realistic. So, but I do think that's how I'm wired. And I think in a future stage of life, that might be something that I try to accommodate because I love that time.
Megan, you said a few things I want to just underscore, because Michael and I are at the same stage of life where our kids are grown and launched and not needy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like we're very fortunate.
Nobody needs you to make breakfast for them anymore.
I would go that far.
Exactly. Yeah. You can come over and make breakfast for Megan's kids, Michael. That's what you
That's
can
right.
do.
That's how I'm going to get my 7 a.m. time.
But you talked about walking before writing. There is brain science behind that shows that there is a very strong connection between creativity and walking. I think it was Nietzsche or someone, maybe it was Soren Kierkegaard, who said there is no thinking without walking. And I think that's true.
Yeah.
Second thing, adjust your expectations according to the season of life. I could not have the morning routine expanded to an hour plus when my kids were young and they were at home, but my kids aren't young and they're not at home. So now I have the luxury of time, which actually, the ability to do anything is also permission to do nothing. So you have to be careful about that because you can just lose the discipline that the immediacy creates. Yeah. And then the third thing you said that's really important, I think, is Wednesday is my writing day.
Yeah.
If you decide that every day is your writing day, you are probably not going to be as productive if I've got one bullet to fire here and it's Wednesday.
Right.
That there's wisdom to that. Constraints actually increase productivity.
Yes,
and the constraint of picking a day for whatever reason Wednesday works in your calendar. But if it's like and I've been thinking every day is a writing day, and you reminded me that no, if I decide that Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday are writing days, I will take those days more seriously.
Yeah.
So constraints are a good thing. Really, really great principles.
Yeah. It really helps me because I know that my team is waiting on that newsletter. And I know like this week we have a retreat that we're leading tomorrow and Saturday. Actually, we rarely do anything on the weekends, but in this case we are. And if I didn't get it done yesterday, so today's Thursday when we're recording this, there's going to be no newsletter. So it's like, I've got a deliverable at the end of the day and I've got to go pick up my daughter from school, the end, and that is really helpful because I guarantee you I could take 3 days to write that otherwise. Okay. I cannot believe that we are out of time and we have to ask our 3 questions because I feel like we could just keep going. We could have intervention after intervention. It'd be amazing.
This has been fun, man. It's been
so
great.
Fun. Okay. So Carey, we have 3 questions that we ask all of our guests about the double win, winning at work and succeeding at life. So it's kind of like a lightning round. Are you game to play with us?
I'll be brief.
Okay. So the first one is, what is your biggest obstacle in this season of your life to getting the double win for yourself?
Probably the lack of time constraints that an empty nest creates. You need to create false constraints. You said, I have to pick up my daughter at 3. That I remember that season. That was good because I had to get it done. And I talked to a mutual friend, I won't name him, but when his youngest daughter left home, I'm like, how you doing? And he leads a huge church in the South. And he goes, I've never worked more hours in my life. And this is a guy who wrote a book about balancing work and life that sold a bajillion copies. And I find myself in that same thing. Permission to do anything is permission to do nothing. And so it's that self-constraint of making sure that I get my work done so it doesn't leak into the weekend, it doesn't leak into date night. And having the lack of constraints makes that just as challenging as having constraints.
That's so interesting. I can't even quite conceive of that idea, but I'm excited to struggle with it.
Yeah.
Someday.
Exactly. Sorry to tease you.
I get it. I struggle with that too.
Yeah.
Okay. Second question. How do you personally know when you've got the double win? What are the indicators?
My marriage, 100% my marriage. Because if I struggle, I'm probably going to be, quote, successful professionally. It's gone well for the last 30 years, and our company's in a really good season. Your P&L and your numbers tell you an awful lot about whether you're hitting the win. But it's the non-tangibles, it's the closeness, it's the connection
Mm-hmm.
that I feel with my wife. So if my marriage and those key 3 to 5 relationships are not going well, and she'll tell me. I mean, we've had seasons in our marriage, so I really look at the quality, not just the quantity of time. Hey, we had a date night. Hey, we did this. Hey, we went on a vacation. Like, you can tick all the boxes, but still be miles apart. So it's that intimacy, it's that closeness, it's that delight in each other that tells me I'm winning at home. And I remind myself all the time, if you're winning at work and losing at home, you're losing.
Mm.
So I
Amen
agree
to
with your
that.
premise so
Amen.
much.
Yeah. All right. Last question. What is one ritual or routine that maybe we haven't talked about that helps you do what you do?
That's a great question. So here's one that really helps me with my energy during the day. I talked about green, yellow, and red zone very briefly, but I learned this from Larry Osborne maybe 5 years ago. I no longer set an alarm. I was the 4:30 in the morning, here goes the alarm up, ready to go. And what I found is that I was tired a lot during the day.
Mhm.
And
Huh.
so unless I have a flight to catch or a really critical early morning meeting, 350 out of 365 days, I don't set an alarm. And what that does, it allows my body to tell me when I'm ready to wake up. And
Huh.
that has been a real gift, to the point where if we watch a movie at night or a TV show, I'm not falling asleep during the TV show at 9 o'clock anymore. If we're doing a longer drive, 2 hours or more, I'm not pulling over going, honey, you drive. I'm dead here.
Yeah.
So that has really made a difference. And I think when applied with the other disciplines, means I'm capable of producing my highest quality work.
Wow. I love that. I've never thought about
I
that.
do the same thing in prioritizing sleep. Like today, I normally get up at 5, but today I slept till 6:30. And part of it was
Oh,
I wasn't
wow.
feeling great yesterday, and I got a bad night's sleep, and I prioritize sleep over everything. Carey, thank you so much. This has been so rich and everything I'd hoped. So thank you for spending this time with us and sharing your heart and your thinking and your hacks and your tips and your advice.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a joy for me. I appreciate and respect both of you so much and love the work that you're doing,
Thank you.
helping leaders. So it's been a privilege to be with you.
Awesome. Okay, that was a really fun interview. And I
was
can't
so
believe it went
fun.
as long as it did. And honestly, we had to force ourselves to cut it off.
We did, because I feel like we were rapidly approaching it being like an all-day coaching session, which, as it turns out, was just what we needed. It was so great.
You kind of turned the tables on me,
I did.
which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Because Carey's one of those people that I respect and admire, and I really value his coaching.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a good exchange.
Well, I learned so much from that. I mean, I really was asking on your behalf because I knew this was something you were struggling with, but I learned so much, just first of all, to me, the best part was him talking about how to categorically eliminate something from your calendar that's
Man, I
a
love that.
problem. I think that it gave me a lot of courage, because I think sometimes we think about these things that we want to eliminate from our life, and we get to the part where our brain says, but there's no way that could ever be possible without, fill in the blank, something terrible happening. And we stop. And in reality, there might be a novel way of thinking about it that we just haven't thought yet that would avoid that. And I feel like that's what he gave us. And then the idea of how many meetings you can tolerate.
Oh my gosh.
That I'm like,
I think I'm very similar to him in that.
me too.
I don't think I really can do more than 10 or so meetings.
Yeah.
And literally, when I was in the big corporate world, I was probably having 30 to 35 meetings a week.
Basically all day long, every single day.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And sadly, I'm kind of back to that,
Yeah.
and it's self-inflicted.
All the worst stuff is, isn't it?
Kind of, yeah. What is Andy Stanley says something about he was present at the scene of every one of his bad decisions.
Yeah, exactly. There was one person who was always there. And it
But
was
I've
me.
done the category thing before. Like I've said no to brainstorming sessions, for example, because that's
Right.
usually a request for free consulting.
Mhm.
And it's usually from somebody, like a classic one for me would be somebody from church who just wants a little advice, and they respect my leadership and my experience. And how do I say no to that? But I've got to say no to it.
But here's the thing. You stop at the point of, but how do I say no to that? We've all done it. We've all had those moments where in our thinking, we just stop at, but how would that ever be possible? And we don't answer the question. Really what we're saying is it wouldn't ever be possible. And so we're not even engaging our brain in the problem solving. That's where somebody outside of us like Carey can be so helpful.
Well, it's so true. And I get requests for a lot of podcast interviews and I'm not taking them right now.
Yeah.
And it's because I'm trying to focus on my writing.
Right.
And so I just explain that to people. I just say, look, sorry, but I'm not taking any podcast requests right now.
Yep.
If you want to check back with us next year, but right now I'm really trying to focus on my writing.
Yeah. Well, I just felt that there were so many things that I learned out of this interview, and it's just a good reminder of the value of wisdom. I think Carey has been a good student of his life and of the people that he's guided, whether as a leadership coach or in a pastoral capacity. And there's just a lot there, about how leadership works and how life works. I loved going back to the beginning of the conversation we had when he was talking about self-leadership is the biggest thing that we're never taught. And you and I talk about that a lot, that whether it's people that are just not self-aware and, they're presumptuous in some way or whatever, or they have bigger problems that they're unaware of or not disciplined, they're demanding a level of performance from their team that they're not even holding themselves accountable for. Anyway, it was a good reminder.
I also enjoyed our conversation about burnout because
I
think as an Enneagram 3, it's difficult for me to be in touch with my feelings.
Yeah.
Because I tend to just buckle down and muscle through.
Yep.
And as you know, yesterday I took the day off because I wasn't feeling well yesterday morning. And I think just a lot of, too much work kind of had led to the place where I was just crashing and burning.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to give myself permission to stop.
Yeah.
And that was one of the best things I did.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you realize if you have to clear your calendar, of course you can.
Right.
I mean, we're not like saving lives here. I mean, some of you may be saving lives, but we're not.
We're not saving lives.
Nobody's on our table.
And I'll tell you what, I'm on the other end of it and somebody cancels a meeting.
You're like thrilled.
I'm doing the happy dance.
Right. It's like the best thing that could, we do the best thing, at our dinner table. What was your best thing today? What are you most grateful for? Listen, if I got a canceled meeting, that's probably on the list.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Well, guys, we hope you enjoyed this episode of The Double Win. I think Carey's the bomb. And I really want to encourage you to take a look at the show notes, go to some of the resources that we've listed. But you could really help the show by reviewing it and rating it. So do that wherever you listen to this podcast. It really helps us get the word out so we can get this message of the double win out there.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next week.